Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 196, we're getting closer to 200, we're going to take a first look at the 6BZ7, otherwise known as the 6BQ7. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult the professional technician when in doubt. Well, last week we talked a little bit about startup surge and how to start one of our kit amps. What I failed to mention is that you should always consult your owner's manual and follow those instructions. Those supersede anything and everything else. Unless they don't make any sense, in which case you have to use some common sense.
Well, it was pointed out to us that there are some edge cases out there that you have to be careful with. So
yeah, particularly older amps, which have a different startup sequence. But anyways, one of the things about doing a short segment like this is that we can't talk about every single
every detail.
Every detail.
So put you to sleep. It would be a 2-hour-long video.
Some things do get lost in making these short little half-hour videos.
And if there's something that we can't fit in, feel free to add it into the comments. It's good to put it down there.
Yeah, we got a lot of good comments from last week. Okay, so today we're going to take a closer look at the 6BQ7. Also known as the 6BZ7, a 9-pin dual triode. That means there's 2 tubes inside of each envelope. It was originally designed to be used in TV tuner circuits, but is now finding its way into audio. Let's start off with a quick look at the data sheet and a closer look at the tubes, and then we'll pop over to the listening room and see how they sound. Well, this is Charles's baby. What have you got for us, Charles?
Okay, well, we've got a nice assortment of them here, but before we get into those guys, let's take a quick look at the RCA data sheet for it. And RCA created the tube type in the early 50s, so it is actually fairly old, even though most of the examples that we have are fairly modern construction in terms of the second generation of tubes. They would have probably been made in the 60s and 70s for the most part. So what makes the 6BZ7 and 6BQ7 interesting, other than the fact that it's a 6-volt tube, it's on a standard 9-pin base, like many 9-pin dual triodes, is that it has a couple of things really going for it. One of them is really low inter-electrode capacitances. And why does that matter? Well, it matters for the frequencies that you're amplifying. This was almost certainly meant for amplifying very high frequencies, or VHF, and having low capacitances is really important for that, but it does play a role in audio as well. So that's really good. This actually has better capacitances than tubes like the 6DJ8 and 6922, of which this is very similar, and those are both very well regarded audio tubes. It has also a very similar amplification factor to them of 36, and I believe if you look at the 6BQ7 data sheet, they actually have different data sheets even though they're basically the same tube. I believe that one listed as being 38, so it's almost the exact same. And even though it classifies it as a medium mu or medium gain dual triode, that's sort of medium high in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's getting
absolutely
up to the mid-range there.
Yeah.
It also has a transconductance that's lower than a 6DJ8 and roughly the same range of another very similar tube, which is the 6N1P, which is another one of our favorites that is essentially the same tube. It's sort of the Soviet equivalent, even though it wasn't a direct equivalent, but in every way that matters, they should be interchangeable. Just like how this tube can almost certainly be put in many 6DJ8 slots and run just fine. So that's some interesting features for the tube. Unfortunately, it's often overlooked because it's relatively common and also fairly inexpensive. But I think people are really missing out on things. Now, I'm trying to prop this up here. We tried to prop this up at the start of the video, and it's really not going well. There we go. So these actually have a lot to offer, and we got in a nice big... Down it goes again. I'm just going to leave it there.
Okay.
We got in a nice variety of them, and I've been listening to them and rolling them in our testing preamp so I can check for match sections, microphonics, noise, and of course get a feel for how they sound. And there's some amazing variety in them, which isn't something that you normally see or hear with a selection of tubes that's this small. This is all the main versions right here laid out. We have a beautiful Tung-Sol example. I'm going to bring them up one at a time here. And finding 9-pin Tung-Sols these days that are new old stock in reasonable quantities,
new in the box,
is really nice, and
it's really unusual. So how do the tongues sound?
Well, I'm going to get to that in just a second because they're very similar to these guys, and this is actually the GE made version. These ones are marked Jan, so it would have been a Joint Army-Navy or a military production tube. Most likely the same as their domestic production. They don't look very different. And both of these tubes sounded very similar to each other, which is surprising. Normally Tung-Sols kind of stand out a little bit on their own, but these both stood out as having extremely forward, detailed, thumpy bass, which is not something you hear a lot in tubes. And you know, I ran them back and forth, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of bass with these guys. So anybody that likes a thumping bass, these are the tubes for you.
At least in your testing preamp circuit, which is pretty close to center value, really.
It's very close to center value, and it's extremely simple. There's nothing complicated about the circuit. And yeah, they ran beautifully. And next up, we have two other tubes that also were very close to each other. We've got the Sylvania, and this is a red label. So that means that it was a sort of a service tech replacement that was part of their red label program. No different from their usual tubes, of course. So you'll find these with the green and yellow labels on them as well. And the Sylvania, along with the RCA, I think had probably the most even and I wouldn't exactly say neutral, but maybe accurate presentations of the music. It had a nice, what's the best way to put this?
Did it have clarity?
Oh yeah, well it had everything sort of in an acceptable amount, in a normal amount. It was...
so the tube was well balanced.
Well balanced, there we go. That helps. And They were both really good. I think maybe the RCA had just a tiny bit of an edge on the warmth side, but these are both very good tubes if you don't want a lot of coloration or a lot of bass like these guys are providing. Now the last one here is a Japanese production, and I don't know exactly which manufacturer made this. It could have been NEC, Toshiba, Matsushita, although I doubt Matsushita because it doesn't have the double top seam on it, which is common for their 9-pins. Or Hitachi could have been as well. And these, well, they sound like almost every other Japanese voltage gain tube that we have, and they excel with detail and clarity and instrument separation. And yeah, they're a great sounding dual triodes. I don't know what it was with Japanese production, but they always have really good clarity.
I'm wondering if that has something to do with the quality of the materials that they're using, because presumably the materials, the coatings, the grid wires would have all been, maybe the diameter and gauge of these things change, but the basic metallurgy and formulas of coatings would have been the same or similar across all of their tube lines.
Oh, could be, yeah. So,
I know years ago somebody I was chatting with said that the key to the Mullard sound was the fact that they had their own chemical plant.
So they were using the same coatings, the same materials across everything?
Well, they were able to develop formulas as well that were unique to their tube line.
Well, whatever it was that they were using with these tubes, it really brings out the detail and clarity, and that's what this brings to the table as well.
So, can you substitute these tubes do you think, safely for any of the tubes that you mentioned?
I think fairly safely for all of them, unless if you're...
So what would be the subs that would be safe? The 6N1P?
6N1P, the 6DJ8, I would say in 99% of cases, unless if you have an amp that's running them particularly hard. They have almost the exact same max ratings. However, the 6DJ8 or 6922 can go to slightly higher plate voltage, but it doesn't make sense for the operating points that you would be running these at.
It would be unusual for somebody to run them that hot.
Right.
Yeah.
And these...
What else? Anything else that they can sub for? Or would that be the
that's
two?
That's probably about it. However, these were used already in a commercial amplifier. These were actually given out, or I guess not given out. These were supplied with the Schiit Freya N, which is the Freya Novel, which takes 4 of these tubes. They also supplied them with the 6N1P at the same time. And what that means is that you can run these in your Freya Ns if you have them, or you can actually run them in a 9-pin to octal adapter in your standard Freya Pluses. Because it's all the same circuit.
Yeah, interesting.
So you could put a pair of these in the gain stage, a pair of them in the cathode follower stage, and these will work. And they're inexpensive, they're fun to roll, they have lots of bass.
Would we make a couple of sets up and put them in the Freya sets?
Yeah, I think we're going to get that done. They're not up there right now, but check the store over the next couple of days and we'll get them in there.
Okay, so let's head over to the music room and have a listen.
Yeah, which one do we want to listen to here?
Well, I think one of the bass-heavy ones and one of the more neutral ones.
Okay, Tung-Sol and RCA.
Okay.
Okay, we'll be back in a minute.
I felt you move somewhere beside me. I searched around but couldn't find you. In your wild, wild garden, I will be. In your garden, under the magnolia tree. This night has a magical touch, something to be unsaid, something to last forever. In your wild, wild garden, I will be. In your garden, under the magnolia tree.
Okay, what did everybody think of that? I mean, Charles gave a rough rundown of how they sound in his custom testing preamp.
Yeah, hopefully that was captured well in the recordings there. I mean, put your comments and your opinions down below.
Yeah, it's interesting, the resolution of the YouTube sound is probably just about CD quality, maybe not even CD quality, but it's quite interesting that you can hear differences at that level of resolution. So you won't hear the very fine details, but unless you have a very good system anyways that you're feeding it through, you wouldn't hear those anyways. But through headphones, I find I can really hear the nuances.
Good quality set of headphones. You should be able to hear it through YouTube.
Okay, so some interesting tubes came in. These have been really hard to find for, almost a year now. We've been selling down these. These are probably the best EL34s ever made. This is the Mullard XF2 series, and you can always tell it's an XF2 because there's going to be a code down on the waist here, and
sometimes it's barely visible.
There'll be first or second. Let me see I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but I got it up in my focal area. It'll say XF2, so that's the series, and it'll say a capital B, and then it'll give you a date code, which are pretty easy to read out. But these, I see a lot of the XF2s showing up for sale all over the place, and they're worn out. So what do you want to look for? Well, you want to look for good pins. So a little tarnish is fine, but you don't want to see a lot of sign of heavy wear on the pins. That means that the tube has been in and out of amps over the years, or in bad sockets that weren't making good contact, especially traces. Now, there's no traces on this, and in fact, we try not to buy tubes with traces. But if you see a mark, a little bit of white junk, or some melting in between pins, that means that we've had some shorting and arcing. And that's not normally the tube's fault. That's more commonly the socket. Badly maintained sockets, crap sockets, can destroy tubes quite easily. So after we take a look at the pins and the center key, that often betrays a heavily used tube as well.
It'll be all chewed up.
Now this is a good used tube. It hasn't been tested, but it's looking very, very good. And if you look up here, this is a dead giveaway. If a tube is on its way out, or it's got a lot of hours on it, the gettering will have receded and it will have thinned out substantially. Power tubes in particular are really susceptible to this kind of vacuum degradation, let's call it. A lot of tubes, smaller tubes, it's usually the filaments that'll die before the vacuum dies. Power tubes, it's often the vacuum, maybe in conjunction with the filament. As the vacuum goes, of course, the filament can fry quite quickly. So anyways, have a look at your gettering. This is basically looking like new old stock. It's got a little tiny rim around it. It may have come from the plant like that, or that may just be a sign of 50 or 60 years of vacuum being maintained by that gettering. Anyways, we actually have quite a few XF2s that have been coming in. I don't know what it is with that tube. I'll declare them endangered, and
we won't find any for like 3 months or something like that,
or even a year. And then we'll sell down our stock. A lot of people love this tube, and when they have the cash, they invest in them, because when they're gone, they're going to be gone. So anyways, we have good inventory right now. And talking about Mullards, here is how some power tubes were packaged by a number of manufacturers, including Mullard. I've seen, I think, GE's packaged this way. I think RCA's.
NEC as well.
Yeah, and what it is packaged as a matched pair. So it was factory, look at that, laboratory balanced. But they don't give us a number. So if it was really properly done, what they would do is they'd tell us the operating point of the tester, and they'd give us a milliamp, which would be, of course, the idle plate current. which is what we do when we sell power tubes.
Given that it is Mullard, though, they almost certainly were matched at the factory.
Yeah, the only problem is that if you need a quad, you need 2 matched pairs. So it's not so good to have one low testing matched pair and one high testing matched pair. The amp will work, but
It's better to have them all close.
yeah, at least for stereo. So yeah, and these are really easy to tell apart from many EL84s because there's a center hole in the plate on both sides. Now, it's normal with new old stock EL84s to see a little tiny bit of sort of smoke or burn mark on the glass. And as they get older, there's more and more of that. This gets really, really hot. What this is a miniature 9-pin version of the EL34. Now, it's not the same tube, but it was intended to do similar duty as the EL34, but in a 9-pin miniature package. And of course, it was an extremely, and still is an extremely popular tube. We had a number of quads of these new old stock, Philips branded, but Blackburn made. This is almost certainly a Blackburn tube. If we look for the code, can we read the code upside down? Do you see the B, Charles? There's the code. Maybe you can see it. Anyways, as far as I know, Mullard made all the EL84s in the Blackburn plant. Blackburn, UK, was their huge, huge plant. Similar to what Philips had in Holland. They had the Heerlen plant. That was the home base of the corporation. It was also the largest manufacturing plant, even though Philips and Mullard had plants all over the place. Philips had plants all over the world. And of course, Philips owned Mullard, going way, way back. I think they bought them in 1937, something like that. Anyways, we still have one new old stock matched quad of these, not these, but the Philips branded Mullards, and we're working to try to keep them in stock. They're very popular. It's not an inexpensive EL84, unfortunately, but it's probably one of the best ever made. Philips and Mullard invented the EL34 and the EL84, so it's not surprising that the Philips Mullards...
that they make some of the best examples.
Yeah. And here's a tube that Charles discovered. This is the Matsushita 12AX7, made in Japan, and this is a wonderful tube. It's made on Mullard machinery, and it's very, very similar in construction to the UK Mullard. And sonically, it's very similar as well. And some of them, I think, flash even. Not all of them, though.
Yeah, some of them do. I don't know if it was a very early version of the production, but you do get a little bit of a filament flash on them sometimes.
So these sell like hotcakes, and we're just able to stay ahead of orders.
Yeah.
So we got a small bunch of new old stock in, and hopefully, I think we're down to one matched pair. Hopefully, we'll have some more matched pairs in the store, because as far as I'm concerned, there are very few good sounding 12AX7s. Well, it's a modern version or a vintage version. And this is typical for a lot of very high gain tubes. The manufacturers tended to focus on building sort of a safe, low noise, high gain version.
And usually ends up with a bit more of a neutral sound to it.
Yeah, as a result. So a lot of people are running a 12AX7 in a phono stage, for example, or in a high gain application in a guitar amp. Usually the first tube is a high gain tube. And for that, you really, in many cases, most people, I think, would want to have a warm, rich mid-range out of that tube. And when it's very neutral sounding, well, you start wondering if I should just have a solid-state amp. No. You can just find a good quality tube that's got the sonics you're looking for. And that's why we roll tubes, of course. Okay. Well, if you've stayed to the very end, here's some discount codes to help you out. We can reach pretty much everyone around the world with flat rate shipping of $20. If you're in an island nation or a difficult place to ship like the Philippines, please contact us before you order, or if you have a mail forwarder in the US or Canada, that's your best bet. Because we can't get tracking to difficult places, and any kind of a valuable order we will not ship. And if your order is $150 or more after discount, The shipping's on us, folks. And of course, there's some discount codes to help you out. And people have been guessing the secret code that, it's not that hard to guess, I guess. And grabbing some serious money on the discount as well. And that I always like to see. Times are tough for a lot of people. And I like to see people grabbing the discounts. Okay, everyone. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Enjoy your summer days. Cheers, everyone.